The push for gun control keeps gaining momentum as President Trump holds another listening session, and students continue to speak out and demand answers. We're going to hear from the kids, the president, and much more. Also, a parade of people from the far right, from the fringe to recognizable faces speaking at this year's CPAC convention. But the president and vice president, they'll also take the stage. This is a good move or a bad move for them, for the base, and maybe for folks in a midterm election that may not be too crazy about who they're sharing the stage with. Then the prosecution, they've arrested in the Prococo corruption trial. Now it's the defense's turn. We've got the latest from the courtroom. We'll check in with Dominic. Evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French, and thank you for joining us this Thursday evening. We begin tonight with a national dialogue about guns and gun control that feels like it is gaining steam by the day. Now, in a few minutes, we're going to take a look at the politics of it all. But first, let's start with what is, frankly, a student-led movement. High school kids, they have been the most vocal, so we wanted to play some of what they've been saying in their own words. They've been telling their stories, slamming, among others, the NRA and the politicians who take money from them. And of course, they are calling for overdue change.
When I was in 5th grade, I had to hide in a closet, in a bathroom for 3 hours and just waiting with my teacher and nearly 20 other kids to see that just because a shooter has come to our town, not even in the school itself, now 7 years later, I'm in a closet with 19 other kids waiting, fearing for my own life.
I personally have not been invited to the White House, and if I am invited, I will not be in attendance.
We don't have jobs, so we can't pay for your campaign. We would hope that you have the decent morality to support us at this point.
And not take money from people that want to keep lessening gun legislation and making it even easier for these horrifying people to get guns. Because if you can't get elected without taking money from child murderers, why are you running?
The reason we are starting March for Our Lives and doing this on March 24th is we've been hearing a lot that this is not the time to talk about gun control. And we can respect that. We've lost people. It's important to mourn. Here's a time to talk about gun control, March 24th.
Now, he's talking about the March for Our Lives. It will call for greater gun control. It is set for Saturday, March 24th in our nation's capital and also in 50 other cities, including New York. Now, parents, they've also been speaking out. They said their piece at the White House yesterday and also at the CNN town hall in Florida last night.
We're here because my daughter has no voice. She was murdered last week and she was taken from us. Fix it. Should have been one school shooting and we should have fixed it. And I'm pissed.
If he's not old enough to buy a drink, to go and buy a beer, he should not be able to buy a gun at 18 years old.
These deaths are preventable, and you have the ability to make a difference and save lives today.
Senator Rubio, my daughter, running down the hallway at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, was shot in the back with an assault weapon, the weapon of choice. Yes, sir. Okay? It is too easy to get. It is a weapon of war. The fact that you can't stand with everybody in this building and say that, I'm sorry.
Teachers and administrators, they're also speaking out.
You love the students as your own babies. And some of the dialogue that I've heard recently is about arming teachers. We don't need to put guns in the hands of teachers. You know what we need? We need to arm our teachers with more money in their pocket.
When I had those hundreds of terrified children that were running at me, my question to that is, am I supposed to get extra training now to serve and protect on top of educate these children on how to be these eloquent speakers that are coming up and presenting issues to you? I mean, am I supposed to have a Kevlar vest? Am I supposed to strap it to my leg or put it on my desk?
Now, those teachers and educators are responding to the following comments by President Trump, and it's been an evolving position over the last couple of days, both at listening sessions at the White House and these latest comments coming just this afternoon.
It's called concealed carry, where a teacher would have a concealed gun on them. They'd go for special training, and they would
be there, and you would no longer have a gun-free zone.
I want certain highly adept people that understand weaponry, guns, if they really have that aptitude, because not everybody has an aptitude for a gun, but if they have the aptitude, I think a concealed permit for having teachers and letting people know that there are people in the building with gun, you won't have, in my opinion, you won't have these shootings.
Now, we're going to be talking about the movement this segment. We'll talk about the politics later with our panel, and let me bring him in right now. Richard Brodsky, he's a former Democratic New York State Assemblyman from Westchester, a professor at NYU. Imagine that class. Conservative strategist Bill O'Reilly, and our senior political correspondent Andrew Whitman. Again, I want to get to the politics in a second, and certainly the biggest story coming out of the last 2 days has been arming the teachers, as many as 1 million teachers packing heat. But let me start what I don't say often, and at least give the president a little credit yesterday in the White House, listening to not just an echo chamber of people telling him what he wanted to hear, which I've seen a lot of, particularly in the last year, but hearing disparate voices, and to have a dialogue that we frankly haven't had in a long time. I thought, additionally, not conversely, last night there was some extremely powerful and moving moments that came out of Florida as well. I, for one, have been wrong so many times about events that would change the course, most notably Sandy Hook. I never thought 5 years ago, after that tragic event, that we wouldn't have led to more seismic change that never really happened except at state levels, and limited ones at those. But the kids have been nothing short of breathtaking, courageous, eloquent, whatever words you want to use, for me at least they are. I think, Bill, unless I'm naive, that maybe it'll just be modest. I hope that won't be the case. I think it could be pronounced. And we'll talk about the politics, because I think there's consequences if it's not. But I think we're at a moment here that I haven't seen before, at least. You agree?
Something does feel different. And the question is whether this news cycle can be sustained, because things happen so quickly in the world today. We'll be talking about North Korea tomorrow or something else. But something does feel different. One of the speakers, by the way, is the father of one of my daughter's best friends who survived. She and her brother survived, but he was at the White House speaking to President Trump. They have been so eloquent, these parents and these students, in the immediate aftermath of a massacre. It's really pretty extraordinary. Whether you're wherever you are in the Second Amendment, you gotta respect them because they just went through something. They understand something in a way that anyone who hasn't been in that situation can't, and we ought to at least listen. It seems like there's some listening going on. I agree about President Trump. He went there and listened. Marco Rubio took a beating last night, but stood there and listened.
A lot of people ducked it, and
it.
at least he showed.
I think you may get a little bit of.
And Andrew, I thought originally, to be honest, the March 24th date was a mistake, that they were letting too much of a time interregnum go by here, and that when you have the attention of the public, if you think about Sandy Hook, the president, then Obama, decided I'll leave it to Congress, let them, because all the polling and everything said this is what the public wanted, and I still believe that. In retrospect, I think they should have moved sooner. I think maybe March 24th is a smart idea, because this will not go away between now and then. They'll be able to organize huge rallies. I think there's be more than 1 million people in Washington. I'll be there covering it. I believe that it will be a historic event.
I think the numbers of students and the chance that they've had to plan in advance will make it a story that weekend again. The question, and I think Bill posed a good one, is does it remain front and center between now and then? And the difference now is that because those stories are so compelling and those students are so compelling, people are listening in a way that they didn't listen after Sandy Hook, and that they didn't listen.
Don't you think the kids are going to force?
I hope so, but the concern is between now and then. I mean, will it still be front page news? Will it still be every day this compelling? Part of that's the news cycle itself. Bill was talking about other events, but this is America in 2018, so God only knows what
Andrew,
horrible tragedy might happen between now and then.
Exactly. You've done so many times where you go over, we have a mass shooting, what, once a day in this country on average?
Yeah,
and that
to the point where it
people
doesn't really make news. And You know, I don't honestly know if there's been another mass shooting in the last week. I'm sure there has been, but it hasn't made news in that sort of way. So can they keep this up? And how do they keep it up between now and March 24th?
Rich, I played a fraction, obviously, of some of the compelling sound that we heard both in Florida and Washington yesterday, and frankly, at schools all around. Anything jump out stood out to you?
What stood out to me is it felt like the 60s. The anti-war movement, the civil rights movement, the beginnings of the women's movement, the beginnings of the environmental movement, all in a 4 or 5 year period led by kids. I was one of them, if you can believe it goes that far back.
Nope.
And the notion that, and real change resulted, real fundamental change in American society. If these kids can maintain the energy, it doesn't matter whether there's a week or a month between now and Washington, because the action's going to be local. The action's going to be in congressional districts and in Senate
districts. And I swear, I'm not trying to jab it, okay, or relitigate it, but Zuccotti Park, where they had that, where they had a movement here, and they had the attention of the public after the crash, and there was an us and them certainly was the 99%, if you will. I felt it fizzled in a lot of ways because there was a leaderless structure and an absence of organization. And again, I don't want to relitigate that, but in this case, you have kids driving it. And the fear I have is if they're co-opted, it's less powerful a message, but if they're not co-opted, how does it get structured?
Let it go. Let it organically grow. We do disagree about whether Occupy had an impact. I think it did. We do have an opportunity here to let these things percolate up, and not in terms of how it affects the president or the Speaker of the House or Mitch McConnell. This is going to matter in swing districts around the country. And the problem for Republican politicians has been, if they do the right thing, as I understand the right thing, they endanger themselves in a primary. The Republican Party is the captive of a small group.
Well,
these kids may unshackle
That's the perfect segue, because when we come back, I'm going to talk about some of the specific issues that the different sides want or don't want here, and where there may be compromise, and whether that'll be sufficient here for the change that people are talking about. The art of the possible, the push for gun control, as I think we'll all agree, is the strongest we've seen in many years, but still a lot of opposition from the NRA, and also, as you saw today, from conservatives as vocalized at CPAC. So how will this all sort out? I'll ask the panel that straight ahead.